The 2024 Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by Glossica.
Okay, hello everybody. Before we start, I like to tell you that if you have any questions, just ask on the Slido after the presentation. And let's start with how kinship systems shape your worldview and reality. Welcome, Israel.
Thank you. I'm a tiny bit worried we won't have time for the questions, but I'll try my best. But yeah, welcome. How's everyone's night? I hope everyone's not too hungover for this. It is, for the camera, this is 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, the last day of the gathering, and I'm doing the first talk, and I'm very happy for every single one who made it here. I know it's difficult, because it was for me as well. So I'm talking about how kinship systems shape your worldview and reality. What are kinship systems? If you don't know this word yet, that means sort of what you call your family, and that sort of changes among different cultures, as I know you probably know already. But first of all, the brief introduction. This is me. I'm a composer first and foremost. I'm doing my final year in my PhD in music composition at the University of Manchester. I write concert music, a bit of opera and film, that kind of stuff. And now I'm mostly like researching things related to my experience as an immigrant in the United Kingdom. And you're very welcome to commission me if you'd like to. Next is, I'm a polyglot. As you might be able to guess, I've been running a language blog since 2015, but nowadays I've spent more time on my channel than my blog, even though I love to write more. My channel is called Rhapsody Lingo, which you should definitely follow right now. And I also have a podcast called 水言狂想, which is about languages and linguistics, sort of like a whole spectrum of topics. And it's meant to like promote talking about linguistics in more languages where you're not expecting it. And I also love writing Cantonese. I think it should be something that should be done more. Anyway, so here's what we're talking about today. First question, what is the difference between your mother and your aunt? And obviously, yeah, they're sisters, right? In English, everything's well-defined. What is the difference between your aunt's son and your father? Usually, they would be different ages, or maybe you think of them in different generations. They have different significances to you, and so on. But there are definitely two different concepts in the English context. And why do these differences matter to you? Why does it matter to you that your aunt and your mother are different? Why does it matter to you that your cousin and your father are different concepts in your brain? And this last question is weird. I actually want to do a little quick survey, but we don't have that many people. How well do you know your uncles and aunts' names? If you know all of them, can you raise your hand? Okay, so I'm the exception here. Because I'll explain that later. Because I think this might be a side effect of certain cultural differences. Not the main thing, but the side effect. Okay, so what are kinship systems? Let's start here in Prague. Oh wait, I don't speak Czech, sorry. Let's go back to English. So this is what a kinship system looks like, as in like what you name each kind of person in your extended family. So in English, we've got like, I don't know, siblings, brother, sister, and then your father and mother, each of them have their own family, uncles and aunts, and then you have like cousins and so on. That's what we call them. Let's zoom in on some things. This is what we usually call a nuclear family, right? The core family. You and your parents, your siblings, and then when it goes on and you get older, maybe your partner and then your children and so on. That's a nuclear family. And then let's look at this. Obviously, all of us should have 4 grandparents, right? That makes sense. Even if they're not alive or you never knew them, we do have them. But the question is, why? Why do we have the same word for 2 different people? Grandmother and grandmother, they are definitely 2 different people, but we have the same concept for them. And so it's the same goes for great-grandparents. And then also look at this. Father and mother, and then on both sides we have aunts and uncles, and the only difference the only difference that we make between these concepts is the gender. And then in English, I don't know other languages that well anymore in comparison to English, but there's a thing called in-laws, and to me that's a very interesting phenomenon. You have like sort of, you add in-law to everything, and then suddenly it becomes like the family of your partner or something. But the main point is, each person is a unique individual. I think we can all agree on that. And that's why when we call someone a certain thing, call aunts or uncles or whatever, we are putting them into groups. We are giving a label, we're giving them a definition, what they mean to you. So how do we give them this label? Why? Why do we choose a certain label for each person? For example, when we give them a label, what features are the ones that matter to you? For example, let's do a little analogy. There's this thing that some places are doing, including China. They want to do like a trackless train thing, where the track is like a painted on the road, and then the train goes on that track using some cameras or something. Is that a bus or a train? Well, how do we know if it's a bus or a train? Does it have tracks? Kind of. Trains usually have tracks, like the iron kind. What is this? Or is it a train because it's got multiple carts? But buses can have multiple carts. Is it a bus if it goes on car roads? Like how do we define what they are? So let's see. How do you define the difference between an uncle and a cousin? Do they have to be in the same generation? No, because in English you have something called cousin and then something removed or second. I don't know that very well. So it doesn't have to be same generation for it to be a cousin. Could be different generations, like uncles. Or maybe the difference between uncle and cousin is that with a more distant cousin, you go back further, and with an uncle, you only go back to your grandparent. And also, does it make a difference if it's on your father's side or your mother's side? It could. We'll see later. Next analogy. What makes a dog a dog? This is a big analogy in like the AI world, I think. People always talk about how machines recognize pictures. Do we classify something as a dog based on appearance? Or is it from their lineage? Or is it from their function as a man's best friend? Or is it based on what they eat? Or what we eat, sorry. So let's go back to the cousin thing again. What makes a cousin a cousin? Then that's all the complicated things. I actually had to learn all of that for this presentation because these are concepts that don't exist in my dictionary. So yeah, so we can see that uncles and cousins are really similar things, but they sort of just go back different generations, and sort of there's a little slope that goes up. So there could be different generations, and how far does an uncle go, a great uncle, compared to a cousin? Or maybe it also depends on like what gender this person is, or maybe what gender the side of the parent is on. So what if we could make our own system completely from scratch? Let's say we don't know any words for any family members or relatives. What will we consider? How we name someone and how we group people into different labels. First of all, gender. I mean, it gets quite complex nowadays, but traditionally, gender is a big thing. They have different labels for men and women, usually. So, but it also can involve genders of the people that are sort of connecting you to that relative, like your father or mother. Age. Is it about generations, or is it just about the difference in age between you and that person, or between your father and their father, and so on? And whether you are directly descended from someone, like to say that they are your parent. But again, how direct do you need to be direct? And then there's also adoption and other kind of less traditional ways of building families. So let's see what systems we get in the real world. Let's say we went all the way to the minimum. We have Hawaiian kinship. This system is based on just sex and gender, and the sex of the person we're talking about, not the sex of like other people involved in that relationship. And also, it's about generation, like who, if your parents are brothers, and then you are the same generation. But it's not about age, and that's why I'm going off this categorization by Lewis Henry Morgan. There's 6 main kinds of systems in the world, according to this guy. It's a tiny bit outdated and not very conclusive, but yes. This is called a generational system, which is also called Hawaiian kinship. So we can look at some hypothetical examples. Let's say we build a system based on just sex and generation. Your male sibling would be your brother, right? We're using English words for now. Your female sibling would be your sister. Your male parent, yeah, different generation. Now you need a new word for this person. And also, your female parent would be different from your female sibling because it's a different generation. But when it comes to your mother's female sibling, and then you're like, wait, they are the same generation, they're the same sex, so it's the same concept. Your mother's sister is just your mother, because in this system it doesn't matter. But your father's sister would be also your mother in this logic, and so on. And then when you have cousins, I'm technically confused now because it's 9 a.m. Your aunt's child would be your sister, and so on. And hence, if you look at this graph, you see ego, which is me, your person, and then all your cousins in English would be your brothers and sisters, and then everyone that's in your parents' generation are your parents. So what does that mean for that culture? Why do they do this? Or I don't know if it changes the culture or the culture shapes it. That could be either way. So maybe it does mean in the extended family, which is the graph we looked at earlier, the people are closer to each other. Maybe your parents would raise your cousins because it's all one close family. And in that context, they are they are parents as well to those children. And economically, that means that traditionally in the culture, people share lots of responsibilities, including child rearing, raising children, and also production, and so on. And when you grow up, you can choose which side of the family to be affiliated with. It's a bit more flexible like that. And apparently a third of all world societies work like that. Not population, but world societies. So someone decided there's a certain number of societies, and a third of them use this kind of system. And it's usually in smaller societies, like, as I said, Hawaiian and certain similar, like Polynesian communities. So maybe this way it helps you form big clans of family, because if your uncles and aunts are all just father and mother, you might as well all live together and bond together. But also, I know we're language nerds, so we want to talk about the actual words in Hawaiian, I bet. So these systems are most commonly found in Polynesian languages, as I said, including Hawaiian. For example, forgive my Hawaiian pronunciation. Hope no one's listening to this who's native in Hawaiian. So, makua is a parent, or, obviously, other people in the parents' generation. Makua kane would be a father, so it's the male parent, or your uncle, or your mother's sibling, and so on. Makua hine would be your mother, and you get the idea. Brother, or your male cousins, you have kaikua ana, and then also kaikua na. What? Why the different ones? Oh, wait, because these generations that Lewis Henry Morgan designed were not conclusive. They don't really describe the whole thing. It's more like broad strokes. It's just giving you a rough idea of how the system works. So in Hawaiian specifically, there are also other factors that change the system. So for example, your gender as a person, and then whether, for example, I'm a male, and then my word for sister would be different from if I were a female. And also, it depends on your age. Let's say you're older or younger than your brother or sister. So for example, my older brother would be kaikua ana, or cousin. My younger brother would be kaikaina. So there are different words for different kinds of things. So these systems I'm talking about are not 100% just what they actually are. It's just generalizations. But yeah, I have a little sister. She would call me kaikunane. So it depends on who they are as well. So we can see that compared to English, for example, some factors are less important. Let's say whether someone's your cousin or not. But some things are more important, such as age or your gender relationship to your sibling. Now, if we took this minimal system and one more thing, you get the, oh, I was told, I'm not supposed to use that word anymore, so I'm not going to say it, but when the person, Lewis Henry Morgan, designed these systems, it was still okay to say that. So nowadays, according to Wikipedia, at least in Canada, you need to say Inuit kinship system, which makes it really confusing to read on Wikipedia, but that's how it is. Inuit, as in, it's based on the kind of societies that are found in like the northern part of Canada. Right, so we're adding lineal versus collateral. What does that mean? Lineal means, let's say you and your father are directly descended. Collateral means, let's say me and this person share, so we have different fathers, but their fathers, our fathers are siblings. That's collateral. So in English, that would be called cousin. So in this system, if the relationship is more direct, let's say parent to child, the terms become way more specific. So let's think about this. My father and then his brother, is that important? And then let's say my mother and then her siblings' daughter. Okay, now you have like an extra degree of separation. So we might not need as specific of words because in this system, they're collateral. We don't need to be that specific about them. It's just general people. And let's skip these because we won't have time for those. So the idea, you get the idea, right? So if there's more separation, then we don't care as much about them. And that's how it is. So look at the green ones. Green ones basically, I keep saying they're less important, but what I mean is they are less differentiated. You have more words for different kinds of relationships. And so you group them into one big kind of concept. So you have all cousins along this. So let's look at Breton, because why not? If you look at the nuclear family, your father's tad, mother's mum, brother's breur, sister's huar, son's mab, daughter's mère. All different words, obviously. And when you look at the extended family, as in people outside of this basic group, I've pronounced it, entre and I give up. So these are for the siblings of your parents, and then these are for their children, and they are separated by gender. So Kendelv is male, Kenitelv is a female. So, okay, what does that mean? That sounds familiar, right? So, not Eskimo, sorry. Inuit system is the system that is predominantly found in Western cultures, as in Europe, and then the cultures influenced by European powers. That's why this is actually the most familiar one, probably, to those of us who are here. And as I said, the collateral relatives are less important. Oh, can I just, a little addendum. Relative and family to me, I was talking about this with my friend yesterday. Family in English, it's supposed to be extendable. Family can cover like your relatives, your distant uncles and cousins, and so on. But to me, as a Cantonese speaker, family has always meant like the core family, and then relatives are like the extended ones. So my understanding of these words might be different from like a native English speaker, and the way I use them here as well. So back to collateral relatives, as in like the ones that are related by, that have like more siblings involved in a relationship. At some point, it's so unimportant that it's just a number, like first, second cousin, third cousin, twice removed, and so on. It just basically start counting them instead of giving them any new names. And if you thought that was the norm, sorry, this is actually only in 1/10 of all societies. But obviously that includes most Western or European influenced societies. So we feel like that's everywhere. And that means that this system means that the immediate families, and your father and mother, your siblings, are the most dominant ones, the most important ones. And the nuclear family usually work together. For example, in European culture, you usually live with your family until you grow up, and then you have your own family. So each nuclear family is their own thing. But obviously, there is also different exceptions. I think you might know the Scandinavian one if you have learned any Scandinavian language. where your grandparents are very well defined. So your mother's mother was mur, your father's mother is mur. You might see a pattern here. Your father's father is far, your mother's father is mur. So the two grandpas are different. And then if you keep going, your great-grandparents, your mother's mother's mother is mur shmur, your mother's father's mother is mur shmur. You get the idea. So what if you are both, you're both a mur and a far mur? What do you say? So I saw this video on Instagram a while ago, and it talks about
Norway, how do you say grandma? Grandma, it depends. Depends on what? Well,
Norwegian,
it depends
not
if it's
Swedish,
your mom's
Norwegian.
mom, mormor, or your dad's mom, farmor. What? Look, it's very simple. Here's a chart. No nerdy stuff. What about the person in general? Oh, it's probably best mom. Best mom? Are we playing favorites here? Well, they do
Okay.
spoil us.
See, I had a problem with that phrase, grandma in general. And when I heard that, I was like, what do you mean grandma in general? Why is there necessarily a grandma in general? That's a very sort of English-based idea. So in Swedish, compared to Norwegian, they are slightly different. In Swedish, there is no grandma in general. There's only mormor and farmor. And if you have a great-grandson, you also keep adding barn is child, so barn is child's child. And that one is less differentiated. And then even your uncles and aunts are defined by which parent that is. So like your father's sister is faster and so on. And so that's why I took a problem with that. So this brings me to an important thing. Because I was having this discussion with a friend a few weeks ago in Germany, and she asked me, what about, I want to say I'm a grandma, like, how will I say that in Swedish? You can't do that. And my response to that is that I'm a grandma means that you identify as a grandma. That's sort of like what you do. But in certain cultures, that includes Swedish, but also other cultures that we will see, it's more important to think about your relationship to a certain person. So if you're a grandma, that means you're a grandma to that person. You're not a grandma if that person doesn't exist, right? So it's how you construe of yourself and how you relate to your relatives. So when the relationship defines who you are, let's go on to the next kind of system. Now we are going somewhere where there's also a cultural difference when it comes to how the relationships define your worldview and your way of life. So what other things can we add to the things that we talk about? We added collateral versus lineal. Maybe you can add age. Maybe you can add which side of the family, father or mother. Let's go crazy. Let's add everything. Maybe even which side of their family. Let's say this person, I'm related to them through my mother and their father. And in patriarchal societies, that usually means you have the same surname if it's all male in between, like my father and their father, then we have the same surname. And there are terms for that. If in this system, if it's about my father and their father, then we are parallel cousins. Otherwise, we're cross cousins. And that's how we get to Sudanese kinship. It's the most descriptive. Okay, so it means there's most detail in each kind of relationship. Each term tells you more about them. That means also each relationship has a different terminology. And obviously, we're talking about like when you're defining relationship by the factors that we talked about. But again, this is not conclusive. There could be other factors you could add. You could think about age, like what we talked about in the Hawaiian system. You could also think about which number. Let's say I'm the third child in the family. And this is a point where I reveal that there's actually a Trojan horse because I'm trying to talk about Cantonese anyway. That's what I usually do. So the Sudanese kinship is the one that is found in Sinitic societies, and obviously Sudanese as well, and some other ones. But that's the one I grew up with, so I'm going to talk about it from my perspective. So Sudanese, look at the chart again. The basic idea of Sudanese kinship is that you see lots of different colors, right? Different terms for every person, but then in our system, the Sinitic one, you add age as well, except for your mother's brothers. So we have different words for each uncle and aunt, except your mother's older and younger uncle. Apparently, your mother's older and younger brothers, they're less important. And welcome to my life. This is the system I grew up with, and every single term in this chart is a different term, and I had to learn all of them. And so that's actually how I had to learn it as a kid, right? So I had a little trick when I tried to learn this system, because when it comes to, like, in English, your second cousin, third removed or something, it gets really confusing because we also need to define what kind of relationship we have. So what I always did was I removed 1 degree of separation. For example, I want to talk about my father's older parallel male cousin, which means my father's brother's son, right? So my father's cousin, and then they all have the same surname. So first of all, I treat my father's cousin as his sibling. And then I call him my uncle, Bakfu. Older sibling, Bakfu. And then I think, okay, because if we have the same surname, I'm going to add Tong, Bakfu. So it's like a whole maths thing. And it also goes on like that. That's why we have a thing called a kinship calculator. This is obviously a more recent invention, right, in the smartphone age. There is a website and there's an app that you can download. And also, it's not one system throughout all Sinitic societies, right? The words differ by language as well. So this one's a Cantonese one. And basically what you do is you type in your relationship, my father's mother's younger sister's son, and also that son is older than me or younger than me, and then you get a result, like a calculator. Now, I'm afraid we won't have time for other systems because I absolutely forgot to time this thing. So I'm going to have to skip all of them. But if you're interested, you're welcome to ask me for the slides because I think these are extremely interesting. But I'm going to give you a very rough idea what it's about, okay? So Iroquois kinship is, it means people are closer to you if, for example, me and this person, my father and their father are siblings, or my mother and their mother are siblings. But if it's one father and one mother, then it's more distant. And it's because apparently in this society, if my father and their mother are siblings, then we can get married. So it might be a bit mind-boggling to certain other systems. And then Crow and Omaha are similar systems, but with an extra quirk. If you look at the chart. Basically, if it's my father and their mother, that means this person is so distant that it doesn't even matter anymore what generation that is. So my father's sister, so different genders, right? My father's and sister, male and female, and then the sister's daughter is also my aunt. So it gets confusing if you translate to English because, I mean, it's a different language. You can't really translate it like that. But it's funny because you actually end up calling your cousin the same word as you call your father. And then the Crow is just literally just flipped. Okay, now let's come over to what I want to talk about, which is what implications these systems have on our daily lives. Because for example, when you cross cultural boundaries, for example, when I moved to the UK as an immigrant, obviously I speak English quite well, but there are some tiny things that are different that I have to get used to. So for example, if you translate something, you translate TV shows and books. Let's go back to this Swedish grammar example. Let's say you have a line of dialogue in a TV show that says a grammar, and then someone has to translate it into Swedish. So they have to actually figure out which grammar that is, because otherwise it doesn't work. Or if someone says uncle, just Uncle Ben or something, and then in Chinese you have to be like, wait, so which is it the father's brother or the father's sister brother? You have to figure that out through the context of the story. Or maybe sometimes you have two siblings and the story doesn't tell you which one's older, and then we have to figure it out ourselves. And actually that's not just about translation. It's also sometimes people just want to find out. For example, in Pride and Prejudice, I was talking about this with my girlfriend, because she's a big Jane Austen fan. There were lots of complicated relationships. But then people started wanting to know which sibling is older. And it turns out Jane Austen never wrote that into the book. And people were sort of having long discussions on Reddit and like Goodreads just to figure out is that an older or younger sister. And they have to do that through like context, through personality, characterization, or or logical deduction. And they were like, oh, because this person is married to this one, so usually the man is older, especially in that era, so maybe that means this person is older or younger, and so on. It's the whole thing. Why bother? Now, that one without Jane Austen, that was just people being curious. But in certain cultures like mine, it's actually crucial to know whether the person is older or younger, because it is required by the language itself. In English, it doesn't really matter. People are like, yeah, sure, good to know. But if I have to retell the story, I have to define who that person is. And without knowing these things, I can't tell you who this person is. I can only give you a rough estimation. And when it comes to things like uncle's wife in English, that's an aunt as well, I think. But in our language, that would be a completely different concept from a different kind of aunt. And to me, in my brain anyway, it's a very important piece of information to know whether that person is actually related to me by blood or not. So what can a translator do? Draw a graph, probably. Also, as I said, logical deductions. And then in other media, let's talk about books for now. If anyone knows this interface, that is the sponsor of this Polyglot gathering. So I use Glossika for lots of things. And I use that to learn Taiwanese Hokkien from Mandarin. And if you didn't know, originally the system was, the learning method was made in Mandarin because it was made for Taiwanese people. And then Mike sort of added English and expanded from there. But the thing is, when the Taiwanese Hokkien version was made, it was translated from English. And the result is that, for example, this one, Didi, that's a younger brother, but it went through English into Taiwanese Hokkien. Now the translator just didn't know which brother that was. All they could do was have Hiadi, which is older or younger brother. So the translator was like, okay, whatever, good luck. And when I was learning it, I was actually confused because I was like, wait, does that mean Hokkien doesn't differentiate them? But then I checked that it actually does, because, for example, older brother would be a Hia, would not be Hiadi. Hiadi is actually two people. So there is an extra barrier there. And that's why translating through another language is, you lose some information. Also in daily life, for example, someone in English tells me about their sister, and then I want to tell their story to my Cantonese-speaking friends. I have to do that calculation in my brain. I'm like, okay, so which sister? Is it older or younger? Or maybe it's a cousin. Which cousin is it? Or maybe someone tells me their aunt lives somewhere. I'm like, okay, what aunt? I have to do all of that in my brain. Or maybe in Cantonese we just say auntie because we can't be asked anymore, and we are sort of English influenced. The next point is, how well do you know your family? Because in our system, in the Cantonese system, we have lots of very specific labels for every single person of the extended family. And welcome to my childhood trauma as an introvert. I am sure some people can relate. So in our culture, we do a thing where you have a large family dinner, where you greet all your relatives from the same grandparent. And then when you arrive to that dinner, you have to go and greet everyone by saying who that person's relationship to you is. So you have to say which uncle, which aunt, and you have to recognize their faces and connect them to the word. So my mom would say, "Zai ayana," you have to greet your relatives. And I have big families. My father has a family of 10 siblings, and my mother has like 6 or something. I can't remember. So it's like a big matching game. I not only do I have to match the faces to the relationships, but also if I wanted to know what the name were, that's like a third thing to match to those relationships. And that's why I said earlier that I ended up not learning any of the names, because to me, that's just this relationship, this uncle. Thankfully, the couples always sit together at family dinners. So that helps, because I know this person is that person's wife, so the relationship to the wife is defined by my relationship to the husband. So if you might be wondering, what if there are 2 people who are in the same category? Let's say my father has many older brothers or older sisters. So we use numbers. We go back to numbers in the end. So this is how my dad's family looks like. There's at 10. Actually, one of them missing because, 20th century China. And this is literally what I call them. The big one, because that's the oldest aunt. And then I call them 2, 3, because other aunts. And then the first son in that family, I call them the big older uncle. And then it goes to 5th because he's a 5th in the family, and so on. And that's my dad, he's a smaller one. So to me, these are what they are. I mean, that's in my brain, that's the definition of these people. And that's quite interesting because how you define a person in your head is really dependent on these things. But just FYI, with cousins, it depends on how old they are. If they're like similar age as me, we use first name basis. But if they are older, like a lot older, then we start to add some labels as well. So if you compare that to the Inuit system, which is the English system, usually people would call their family on a first name basis, Uncle something, Uncle Tom, Aunt Betty. Even when I did add uncle and aunt to those examples, you still use a first name basis. Let's go back to the discussion I had with my German friend. I said, what if you went to one of your grandmothers? You wanted to say, we are going to one of the grandmothers. What do you say? So in German, she said she would say, wir fahren zu Oma, and then the name. So the relationship Oma is still here, but then they would use the name to specify which grandma instead of like defining that relationship in more detail. But to me, the way I do it is I would say, I'm going to, and then Popo, which is the mother's mother. Because other than that, there's not much need to tell them apart. So let's go to the last part of the presentation, what your identity is. So I had this interesting exchange with my friends because, for context, this is a common Hong Kong thing, I think. Me and my family and lots of my friends, we speak in Cantonese, but we write to each other. We use WhatsApp in English. And then very frequently, my mom would start a text by saying, son, and then something, something, something. And then I started thinking one day, that would be a little bit cringe in English, I think, in like native English. Because if you say son, it sounds like condescending, or you're trying to give them a lecture. But no, my mom's just trying to like address me. So, who are you as a person? Are you defined by your name? Are you defined by your relationship to someone? Or outside your family, to other people, friends and colleagues? How do they define you? Do they define you by your name? Or is it like, are you this person's girlfriend? Are you this person's colleague? And so on. And I realized that when I started living in the UK, there is a significant difference in how we do things. We don't have time for this.
Coach.
The thing is, in our interdependent society, who we are, whether it's inside a family or just with social circles in general, it's quite defined by our relationship to other people. So what happens when I talk to people in the UK is when I say, my friend did this, or my girlfriend said this, they would ask, okay, after a while, at first they would accept it, and after a while, they would be like, so what's their name? And then until then, I wouldn't realize that it's an interesting piece of information to know my girlfriend's name, because in my native Cantonese brain, what's the important piece of information is that this person is my girlfriend. So I tell them, my girlfriend said this, my girlfriend said that, and you don't need to know her name because you're not acquainted anyway. But whereas when I talk to my supervisor, he would told me about his wife, and he would just use the first name. I was like, so wait, who is this person? Is that your sister? Is that your colleague? And then I need to figure out from context, okay, it is your wife. So it's like completely the other way. And also sometimes, even in your family, the different cultures might address each other differently. So in Japanese, for example, very often you would see a husband calling his wife mom. And because that's the mom to his child. And even my mom would call my dad daddy-ya. because that's my dad. But he's not her dad, obviously. Imagine calling your husband daddy. That would be very weird in English. But that's how we do it in certain cultures. Or maybe my mom would sometimes tell me, oh, your little sister, she did this, she did that, and without using her name. And if you go even more extreme from that, sometimes, that's an anecdote from one of my friends, sometimes you would say, your, and then like a certain relationship, even though it's actually my mom. I just say, oh, your certain aunt said this, just so that the listener doesn't have to think so much, okay, who is that person's relationship to me? And because that's the whole point. That is who they are. It's all about the relationship. So that will be all. I think I'm just on time. Thank you so much for being here at so early morning. I hope that was at least somehow interesting. And yeah, so you can, do we have time for questions? We do, yes, perfect. So let's go to the questions. Is it common that people don't really master the kinship system of their society? In my experience, Russians often have trouble with words referring to in-laws. I think that might be a more personal thing, because, for example, in my case, I have a big family, so I would know every single term that I need, especially, as I said, I need to greet them every single time I meet them. Even as an adult, I still need to greet them. So, but if, for example, if I don't have a certain kind of relative, then I would have trouble learning that term as well. I think that's about learning vocabulary in general. Are there asymmetrical systems, different words for different male cousins, but one general term for female cousins? Yes, I just showed you the ones that I skipped, the Crow and Omaha systems. They are vastly different. Well, it's not about male and female, but as I said, if your parent and their parent are the same gender, then it's a certain way. And then, for example, if my father and their if my father and their mother are siblings, then it's like the second layer of significance. And then if my mother and their father are siblings, then it's the most distance. That's the one where I showed you the aunt's child is your aunt or your father. That's very asymmetrical. That's like 3 layers of different distances to you based on the gender. Have you heard reverse kinship terms where a mother would call your child mother and the father? I'm not familiar, sorry. Next one. Are there many cases of those systems getting simplified? I don't think it's necessarily about simplification. I mean, lots of languages do get simpler over time, but it's based on what matters to that culture, right? Because in our culture, for example, those different terms are actually significant. That's why we kept them so long, and even in the 21st century, so they have to remember every single term. But in modern society, perhaps that might change in the future because, for example, we have a different understanding of gender now, or maybe later. Yeah, still quite conservative. So the language changes to suit the needs of that culture, and so the result is so far that hasn't changed much. Do other variants of Chinese have a similar system of Cantonese? Yes. In Mandarin, there's a similar system, but the terms are just different. But it's, and also in Hokkien and other languages as well, because it's sort of a bunch of related cultures. It's just, there are some tiny differences. Like, as I said, in Cantonese, for example, my mother's older and younger brother have the same term, so that's sort of an exception. Maybe in a different Chinese language, they group different things together. So there are minute differences, but it's mainly the same thing. And I think that is it. So thank you very much again. Feel free to follow my stuff for more Rhapsody in Lingo. I run a YouTube channel, but I don't like to make a YouTube channel where I just flex my languages. So I'm trying to do something more cultural. I want to show what these languages mean to me. For example, I'm making a video about language and dialects now. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, feel free to come to my different platforms and also talk to me after this talk. I'll be around until tomorrow. Thank you.